The bullet that killed Thomas Hartley in the summer of 1878 left his wife with nothing but a small ranch outside Pinos Altos, New Mexico territory, and a 7-year-old boy who still asked when his father was coming home. Teresa Hartley stood at the kitchen window of their modest adobe house, watching her son Daniel pitch hay to their 3 remaining horses, his small arms struggling with the weight of work meant for a grown man. The ranch had been modest even when Thomas was alive, but now it felt like an anchor pulling them both under. She wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron and tried not to think about the notice from the bank that sat on the table behind her. 3 months behind on payments. The banker, Mr. Winters, had been sympathetic at first, right after Thomas died from that fever that swept through the territory. But sympathy did not pay bills, and she could see the patience wearing thin in his eyes each time she walked into his office with excuses instead of money. Daniel came through the door, his dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat despite the morning hour. At 7 years old, he still had the round cheeks of childhood, but his eyes had taken on a serious quality that broke her heart every time she looked at him. Children should not have to grow up so fast. "Mama, the fence by the creek is broken again," he said, setting down the empty water bucket. "I tried to fix it like Papa showed me, but I cannot make the wire tight enough." Teresa knelt down to his level, brushing the hair from his forehead. "You did your best, sweetheart. We will figure it out." "Are we going to lose the ranch?" he asked, and the directness of the question startled her. She had tried so hard to shield him from their troubles. "What makes you ask that? I heard you crying last night. And Mr. Winters looked mean when we saw him in town yesterday." She pulled him into a hug, breathing in the smell of hay and boy sweat and sunshine. "We are going to be just fine. I promise you that." It was a promise she had no idea how to keep. The next morning, Teresa hitched their old mare to the wagon and drove into Pinos Altos with Daniel beside her. The town was small, just a single main street with a dozen buildings clustered together like sheep seeking shelter from the harsh New Mexico sun. It had been founded by gold miners 20 years earlier, and while the easy gold was long gone, enough people had stayed to keep the town alive. She stopped first at the general store, where she traded 24 eggs and a wheel of cheese for flour, salt, and a small bag of peppermints for Daniel. Mrs. Chen, who ran the store with her husband, counted out the goods with careful precision. "How are you managing, Teresa?" the older woman asked, her accent still thick despite 20 years in America. "We are getting by," Teresa said, which was neither truth nor lie. "My husband heard the bank might foreclose on your place." Teresa's hands tightened on the counter. "The bank will get their money." Mrs. Chen's expression softened. "You need help, you come to us. Thomas was a good man, we do not forget that." Teresa thanked her and left before the tears could start. Pride was about all she had left, and she was determined not to lose that too. She was loading the supplies into the wagon when she heard Daniel's voice, high and excited, coming from the direction of the livery stable. She hurried around the corner and stopped short at the scene before her. A tall man in dusty trail clothes was showing Daniel a magnificent black horse, its coat gleaming even through the dust of travel. The man was perhaps 30 years old, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that curled at the collar of his shirt. He had the lean, rangy build of someone who spent his life outdoors, and when he glanced up at her approach, his eyes were a startling shade of green. "Mama, look at this horse. Mr. Grayson Vale says he can jump a 6-foot fence." Teresa reached for Daniel's shoulder, pulling him back slightly. "I am sorry if my son was bothering you, Mr. Vale." The man straightened up, and she noticed he moved with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own skin. He touched the brim of his hat in greeting. "No bother at all, madam. The boy was just admiring Zeus here. He has a good eye for horses. My papa used to let me ride his horse, Daniel said, before he died. An uncomfortable silence followed. Teresa saw something shift in the stranger's expression, a softening around the eyes. I am sorry for your loss, Grayson said, and unlike most condolences, it sounded genuine rather than perfunctory. Thank you. Come along, Daniel. We have work to get home to. She turned to leave, but Grayson's voice stopped her. Pardon me, madam, but I could not help but overhear you mention the fence by the creek to your boy earlier. I am looking for work, and I am handy with wire and wood. Teresa turned back slowly. You were listening to our private conversation. Not intentionally. I was settling Zeus in the stable when you drove past earlier. Sound carries. She studied him carefully. He had an honest face, but she had learned that faces could lie. What brings you to Pino's Altos, Mr. Vale? Just Grayson, please. I have been working ranches from Texas to California these past 10 years. Heard there might be work in the territory. He paused, then added, I am a hard worker and I do not drink. I can provide references if you need them. We cannot afford to hire help, Teresa said bluntly. I was not necessarily talking about money. Room and board would do for now, and maybe a small wage once things improve. He glanced down at Daniel, then back to her. A ranch is a lot for one person to handle alone. The presumption in his words sparked her temper. I have been managing just fine, Mr. Vale. Have you? His tone was not challenging, just honest. The fence is broken. Your son said so himself. And I can see from here that your wagon has a cracked axle that is going to break completely within a week if it is not fixed. The mare in the traces is favoring her left front hoof, probably needs the shoe reset. Your boy is doing the work of a man, and he is what, 7? 8? 7, Teresa said coldly, even as each observation hit like a small blow because they were all true. That boy needs a father, and you need a partner. The words hung in the air between them. Teresa felt Daniel's hand slip into hers, small and trusting. She looked at this stranger who somehow saw through all her careful pretending, and she wanted to hate him for it. But more than that, she wanted to say yes, wanted to accept the help she desperately needed. I do not know you, she said finally. No, madam, you do not. But I am willing to prove myself. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Letter of reference from my last employer, the Rocking W Ranch in Texas. Owner is Jim Walsh. You can send a telegram to verify it if you want. Teresa took the paper, unfolding it to read. The handwriting was neat and the words complimentary, praising Grayson's work ethic, honesty, and skill with horses and cattle. It could have been forged, but something in her gut told her it was not. 1 week, she heard herself say. You can work for 1 week, room and board only. After that, we will see. Grayson's face broke into a smile that transformed his rather ordinary features into something close to handsome. Thank you, madam. I promise you will not regret it. As Teresa drove the wagon home with Daniel chattering excitedly beside her and Grayson following on his black horse, she wondered if she had just made the best decision of her life, or the biggest mistake. The ranch house was small but solidly built, with thick adobe walls that kept it cool in summer and warm in winter. Thomas had been a good carpenter, and he had built most of it himself when they first married. That had been 10 years ago, when Teresa was 18 and Thomas was 22, both of them full of dreams about the life they would build together. She showed Grayson to the small bunkhouse behind the main house. It was really just a single room with a cot, a chair, and a small stove, but it was clean and dry. This will do just fine, Grayson said, setting down his saddlebags. If it is all right with you, I would like to take a look around the property before it gets dark. Get a sense of what needs doing. Help yourself, Teresa said. Supper will be ready around 6. She watched from the kitchen window as Grayson walked the fence lines, stopping here and there to test a post or examine the wire. Daniel trotted along behind him like a puppy, and she could see the man was patient with his questions. After about an hour, Grayson went to the bunkhouse and returned with a toolbox. By the time she called them in for supper, he had already fixed 3 broken sections of fence. Over a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and salt pork, Grayson laid out his assessment of the ranch. "The good news is the bones are solid," he said, accepting a second helping of beans. "Your husband built well. The bad news is that there is a lot of deferred maintenance. Fences, the barn roof has a leak, the chicken coop needs reinforcing or you will lose birds to coyotes. The well is sound, though, and the water is good. The pasture land is decent enough." "How many cattle do you have?" he asked. 15 head, Teresa said. "We started with 30, but I had to sell half last year to pay debts." Grayson nodded thoughtfully. 15 is not enough to make a real profit, but it is enough to build on if we can keep them healthy through winter. You will need to get at least 5 more breeding cows to make it worthwhile." "With what money?" Teresa said, more sharply than she intended. "We will figure something out," Grayson said calmly. "How much land do you have?" 160 acres. Homestead claim. "That is good, plenty of room to expand if things go well." He paused, then asked gently, "How far behind are you with the bank?" Teresa stiffened. "That is not your concern. If I am working here, even for a week, it becomes my concern. I need to know what we are up against." She wanted to tell him to mind his own business, but she was tired of carrying the burden alone. 3 months. The payment is $30 a month. I have until the end of August to pay what is owed plus the next month's payment, or they will foreclose. That is $120. Grayson let out a low whistle. "That is a lot of money, I am aware. How much time until the end of August?" 6 weeks. He was quiet for a moment, thinking. "All right, here is what I propose. You have 15 cattle. At current prices, you could sell 5 and keep the best breeding stock. That should get you close to what you need." "And how do we build the herd back up if I sell more cattle?" "We do not. Not right away. We shift focus. You know anything about horses?" Teresa shook her head. "Thomas kept a few for riding and ranch work, but we never bred them. Horse breaking is where the real money is if you are good at it. I am very good at it. A well-trained cow pony can sell for $50 to $75, sometimes more. A really exceptional horse can bring in over 100. We could buy young, unbroken horses cheap. I train them up. We sell them for profit. It is faster money than cattle, and it requires less land." Daniel's eyes were wide with excitement. "Could you teach me to break horses too?" Grayson smiled at him. "I could teach you to ride properly first, then we will see about the rest when you are older. Horse breaking is dangerous work." "So is ranching," Daniel said with a child's logic. "He is not wrong," Grayson said to Teresa. "But one step at a time." Teresa cleared the dishes, her mind racing. It was a solid plan, assuming Grayson was as good as he claimed. But it still required money. They did not have to buy the horses in the first place, even unbroken ones. As if reading her mind, Grayson said, "There is a wild horse herd that runs in the foothills about 20 miles from here. I heard some men talking about it in town. If we could capture a few of those, train them up, we would have no initial investment except time and effort." "Wild horses are not easy to catch," Teresa said. "No, but it is possible. I have done it before." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Look, I know you have no reason to trust me. I am a stranger who showed up out of nowhere, but I am asking you to give me a chance to prove myself. Let me spend the week fixing up the place, and we will see where we are at the end of it. If you want me gone, I will go, no hard feelings. Teresa looked at her son, who was watching Grayson with open admiration, then back at the cowboy. Against all her better judgment, she nodded. 1 week. That first week passed in a blur of activity. Grayson worked from dawn until dusk, repairing fences, patching the barn roof, reinforcing the chicken coop. He was up before Teresa each morning, and often still working when she called him in for supper. Daniel followed him everywhere, handing him tools and asking endless questions that Grayson answered with patience. Teresa found herself watching him more than she cared to admit. There was something appealing about the easy competence with which he moved, the way he could look at a problem and immediately know how to solve it. He was gentle with the animals and kind to Daniel, never shooing him away even when the boy must have been underfoot. On the third day, Grayson asked if he could take Daniel riding to assess the boy's skill level. Teresa agreed reluctantly, watching anxiously as Grayson saddled one of their older, gentler horses and helped Daniel mount. But her fears proved groundless. Grayson was a natural teacher, correcting Daniel's posture and grip with gentle words and demonstrations. By the end of the hour, Daniel was sitting straighter in the saddle and grinning from ear to ear. "He is a natural," Grayson said as they unsaddled the horse together. "His father taught him well." "Thomas loved horses," Teresa said softly. "He always said he would teach Daniel everything he knew." "I am not trying to replace his father," Grayson said quietly. "I hope you know that, I know." And she did. There was nothing presumptuous in the way Grayson interacted with Daniel, just genuine kindness. On the 5th day, Teresa took the wagon into town to sell the 5 cattle Grayson had selected. She got a fair price from the stock dealer, and when she handed $95 over to Mr. Winters at the bank, the relief was so intense she nearly wept. "This is 3 months plus part of the current month," Winters said, counting the money carefully. "You still owe $15 for August and all of September when that comes due." "I will have it," Teresa said with more confidence than she felt. When she returned to the ranch, Grayson was in the corral, working with one of their horses. She stood by the fence and watched as he lunged the animal in circles, his voice low and calm, his movements fluid. The horse, a 3-year-old gelding that Thomas had never quite finished training, responded to him beautifully. "He has a gift," a voice said beside her, and Teresa turned to see Daniel had joined her at the fence. "He does," she agreed. "You think he will stay after the week is up?" Teresa looked down at her son. "Would you like him to?" Daniel nodded vigorously. "He is teaching me things Papa never got a chance to, and he makes you smile more." "I smile," Teresa protested. "Not like you used to, not like you did before Papa died, but you have been smiling more since Mr. Grayson came." Out of the mouths of children, Teresa thought. Had she really been that transparent? That evening, after Daniel was in bed, Teresa found Grayson sitting on the porch of the bunkhouse, cleaning his tack by lamplight. She approached hesitantly, suddenly nervous. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for everything you have done this week. The ranch looks better than it has in months." "Just doing what needed doing," Grayson said, not looking up from the bridle he was soaping. "It is more than that, and you know it." She took a breath. "I would like you to stay on if you are still willing, not just for another week, but permanently." "Well, as permanent as these things can be." Now he did look up, his green eyes catching the lamplight. "Are you sure?" "I am sure I need help. I am sure Daniel needs a man around to teach him things I cannot, and I am sure that you are good at what you do." She paused. "As for wages, I can only offer $15 a month right now, plus room and board. If the horse training plan works out, that would increase." Grayson set down the bridle and stood up, extending his hand. "I accept." His hand was warm and calloused when she shook it, his grip firm but not crushing. For a moment they stood there in the lamplight, hands clasped, and Teresa felt something shift in the air between them. It was not attraction exactly, or at least not just attraction. It was possibility. The summer heat intensified as July turned into August, the sun beating down on the high desert with relentless force. Grayson kept his word about the wild horses, spending 3 days tracking the herd before returning with a plan. He and Teresa would ride out together, leaving Daniel with Mrs. Chen in town, and attempt to drive a few of the horses into a box canyon Grayson had found. It was risky and required perfect timing, but if it worked, they could potentially capture 3 or 4 horses without spending a dime. They left before dawn on a Saturday morning, riding side by side through the cool pre-dawn darkness. Teresa had not spent this much time on horseback in years, and her muscles ached from the unaccustomed exercise. But there was something exhilarating about riding out across the open land with purpose, the stars still bright overhead. "Tell me about Texas," she said as they rode. "You said you worked there for several years." "I did. Started working ranches when I was 16 after my parents died of cholera. Worked my way up from stable hand to head wrangler over about 8 years. The Rocking W was a good place, good people." "Why did you leave?" He was quiet for a moment. "I was engaged to the owner's daughter. Pretty girl named Sarah. We were planning to marry in the spring. Then she met a banker from Houston who could offer her a fine house in the city and a life without dust and hard work. She chose him." "I am sorry," Teresa said softly. "It was for the best, really. She was not cut out for ranch life, and I am not cut out for anything else. Better to find out before the wedding than after." He glanced at her. "What about you? How did you and Thomas end up in New Mexico? We met in Missouri, where I grew up. Thomas was passing through, working as a carpenter. We fell in love fast, maybe too fast. He had dreams of owning land out west, and I wanted adventure. So we came here, filed a homestead claim, and built the ranch from nothing." She smiled at the memory. "Those first years were hard, but they were good. We were happy." "How did he die?" Grayson asked gently. "If you do not mind my asking." "Fever. There was an outbreak that summer. Several people in the area died from it. Thomas got sick and was gone within a week. The doctor could not do anything." She swallowed hard. "I was so angry at first. Angry at him for leaving me. Angry at God for taking him. Just angry. Daniel kept asking when Papa was coming home, and I did not know how to explain that he was never coming home. That must have been terrible." "It was. But you survive because you have to. Because you have a child depending on you, and the world does not stop just because your heart is broken." They rode in companionable silence after that, following the trail Grayson had scouted. The sun was fully up when they reached the canyon, a narrow slash in the rock with steep sides and only one way in or out. Grayson positioned Teresa at the mouth of the canyon, hidden behind a boulder, while he circled around to find the horses. The wait seemed endless. Teresa's heart pounded as she watched the empty canyon entrance, wondering if this whole plan was foolish. Then she heard it, the thunder of hooves on hard ground, growing louder. Grayson appeared first, riding hard, and behind him came the horses, perhaps 20 of them, running flat out. They were beautiful, all wild manes and flying tails, eyes rolling white with fear and excitement. Grayson veered off at the last second, and the horses poured into the canyon. Teresa immediately urged her horse forward, blocking the entrance as Grayson had instructed. The wild horses milled about in confusion, trapped, looking for escape. Grayson quickly constructed a temporary barrier across the canyon mouth using rope and brush, enough to keep the horses contained until they calmed down. "Now we wait," he said, breathing hard from the chase. "Let them settle. Let them realize they are safe. Tomorrow or the next day, we will see which ones are calmest and most likely to train well." They made camp outside the canyon, taking turns keeping watch through the night. In the close darkness, sitting by their small fire, Teresa found herself more aware than ever of Grayson's presence. The way the firelight played across his features, the sound of his breathing, the occasional brush of his shoulder against hers when he leaned over to add wood to the flames. "Can I ask you something?" she said into the quiet night. "Of course. That first day in town when you offered to work for us, why did you really do it? You could have found work on any of the bigger ranches around here. Why choose a struggling widow's ranch?" Grayson was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, I saw you with Daniel, and I saw how hard you were trying to hold everything together. It reminded me of my mother after my father died the first time. He got better from that illness, but she spent 3 months doing everything alone before he recovered. I watched her nearly work herself to death. I was too young to help much then, but I swore when I grew up, if I ever saw someone in that situation, I would help if I could." "Your father died twice?" Teresa asked, confused. "The first time he recovered. The second time from the cholera he did not. Neither did my mother. They went within days of each other." He stared into the fire. "Daniel is about the age I was when I first thought I was going to lose them. It is a terrible thing for a child to carry." Teresa reached out and placed her hand over his. "You are a good man, Grayson Vale." His fingers curled around hers, warm and strong. "I am trying to be." They sat like that for a while, hands clasped, staring into the fire. Neither of them spoke about the connection forming between them, but it was there, undeniable as the stars overhead. By the time they returned to the ranch 3 days later, they had successfully captured 4 horses, 2 young mares and 2 geldings. Grayson estimated he could have them ready to sell within 6 to 8 weeks. Daniel was beside himself with excitement, running circles around the corral to get a better look at the new additions. "Can I help train them?" he asked Grayson eagerly. "You can help with the gentling part," Grayson said, "getting them used to human touch and presence. But the actual breaking, that is still too dangerous for you." Daniel accepted this with reasonably good grace, and for the next several weeks, he spent every spare moment at the corral, talking softly to the horses and offering them treats from his pocket. Teresa watched her son come alive in a way he had not since Thomas died, and she knew she had Grayson to thank for that. The work was hard and sometimes dangerous. One of the geldings was particularly high-strung, and during an early training session, he reared up and caught Grayson with a hoof to the shoulder. Teresa heard the commotion from the house and came running, her heart in her throat. Grayson was sitting on the ground, face pale, cradling his left arm. The gelding was at the far end of the corral, snorting and pawing the ground. "How bad?" Teresa asked, dropping to her knees beside him. "I have had worse," Grayson said through gritted teeth. "Just knocked the wind out of me." But when she helped him inside and got his shirt off, she could see the angry bruise already forming across his shoulder and ribs. She fetched cool water and clean rags, gently cleaning the scrape where the hoof had broken skin. "You need to be more careful," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It is part of the job," Grayson said. "Horses are prey animals. When they are scared, they fight or they flee. I should have read his body language better. If you get seriously hurt or killed, where does that leave us?" The words came out sharper than she intended, fueled by fear. Grayson caught her hand, stilling her movements. "Hey, I am all right. I promise I will be more careful." She looked at him, at his bare chest and the bruise blooming across his skin, and she suddenly wanted to cry. When had he become so important to her? When had the thought of losing him become unbearable? "Teresa," he said softly, and the way he said her name made her meet his eyes. What she saw there took her breath away. "I should finish cleaning this," she said, pulling her hand away and focusing on the wound. But she could feel his gaze on her, warm and intense. Over the following weeks, the unspoken tension between them grew. They found excuses to work together, to stand close to each other, to let their hands brush in passing. Daniel noticed, because children always notice, but he said nothing. He just smiled more and seemed happier than he had in a year. August slipped away, and Teresa managed to make the payment to the bank, though it left their coffers nearly empty. Grayson had sold one of the horses, a pretty mare who had trained up beautifully, for $65. The money was a lifeline, proof that the plan could work. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the promise of fall. The remaining 3 horses were progressing well, and Grayson estimated they would be ready to sell by month's end. Teresa had started sleeping better at night, the constant knot of anxiety in her stomach finally beginning to ease. It was a Saturday evening, the chores done early for once, and Daniel was spending the night with the Chen's son in town. Teresa had offered to cook a special supper to celebrate the successful sale of the mare. She made roast chicken with potatoes and carrots, luxuries she had not been able to afford in months, and even baked an apple pie. Grayson showed up at the door of the main house, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. Teresa had changed into her good dress, the deep blue one that Thomas had always said brought out her eyes. She felt suddenly shy, as if this were a courtship rather than just a meal between employer and employee. Except it was not just that anymore, and they both knew it. They ate at the small table, making small talk about the horses and the ranch and the weather. But the real conversation was happening in glances and smiles, in the way Grayson's hand lingered when he passed her the bread, in the way Teresa's laugh came more easily than it had in years. After supper, Grayson helped her clear the dishes, something he had never done before. They stood side by side at the wash basin, him washing and her drying, moving in comfortable synchronicity. When the last dish was put away, Teresa turned to find Grayson watching her with an expression that made her heart race. "I need to tell you something," he said. "And I understand if it is too soon, or if you do not feel the same way, but I cannot keep pretending." "Pretending what?" Teresa asked, though she thought she knew. "That I think of you as just my employer, that I do not count the minutes until I see you each morning, that I do not lie awake at night thinking about you." He took a step closer. "I am falling in love with you, Teresa. Maybe I have been since the first day I saw you in town, trying so hard to be strong for your son. And I know your husband has not been gone that long, and I know you probably are not ready, but I had to tell you. I had to be honest." Teresa felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. "Thomas has been dead for 15 months. People tell me that is not long enough, that I should grieve longer. But do you know what I think Thomas would say if he were here?" "What?" Grayson asked softly. "He would say that life is short and uncertain, and when you find happiness, you should grab hold of it with both hands. He would want Daniel to have a good man in his life. He would want me to be happy." She reached up and placed her palm against Grayson's cheek. "And you make me happy." "Teresa," he breathed, and then he was kissing her, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she melted into him, into the warmth and strength and rightness of it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grayson rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said again. "I love you, and I love Daniel, and I want to be here for both of you for as long as you will have me." "I love you too," Teresa said, and saying the words felt like stepping into sunlight after a long darkness. "I did not think I could feel this way again, but I do. I love you, Grayson." They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other, and Teresa felt the last pieces of her broken heart slot back into place. Not the same as before, because you could not go back, but whole again in a new way. "Will you marry me?" Grayson asked. "I know it is fast, but I have never been more sure of anything in my life." "Yes," Teresa said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They told Daniel the next day when Teresa picked him up from the Chens. The boy looked from his mother to Grayson and back again, his face serious. "Are you going to be my new papa?" he asked Grayson. Grayson knelt down to Daniel's level. "I would never try to replace your father. He will always be your papa. But if you will let me, I would like to be a part of your life. I would like to teach you things and look after you and your mother. I love you both very much." Daniel thought about this for a moment, then threw his arms around Grayson's neck. "I am glad you stopped in town that day," he said. "I am glad you came to our ranch." "So am I, buddy," Grayson said, hugging him back. "So am I." They were married in October, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Pinos Altos. Mrs. Chen helped Teresa make a new dress from fabric the color of autumn leaves, and Daniel stood up as Grayson's best man, proud in his own new shirt and trousers. The whole town seemed to turn out for the wedding, glad to see the widow Hartley find happiness again. After the ceremony, there was a party at the ranch, with food and music and dancing. Teresa waltzed with her new husband under the fading afternoon sun, Daniel spinning around them in circles, and she thought about how much can change in just a few months. How the right person showing up at the right time can alter the entire course of your life. "What are you thinking?" Grayson asked, pulling her closer. "That I am happy," Teresa said simply. "For the first time in a long time, I am truly happy." That winter was the mildest Teresa could remember, or maybe it just seemed that way because she was no longer facing it alone. Grayson proved to be everything she could have hoped for in a husband, patient and kind and hardworking. He treated Daniel with genuine affection, teaching the boy to rope and ride and repair tack. The hole that Thomas's death had left in her son's life was not filled exactly, because nothing could replace a father, but it was bridged by Grayson's steady presence. The horse training business thrived. By Christmas, they had sold all 4 of the wild horses for a total of $270, and Grayson had already captured and begun training 6 more. The bank payments were made on time, and for the first time since Thomas's death, Teresa could think about the future without fear tightening her chest. In February, Teresa realized she was pregnant. She told Grayson on a cold evening as they sat by the fire, Daniel already asleep in his room. Grayson's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, joy, wonder, before he pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Teresa asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. Happy does not even begin to cover it. Terrified, amazed, grateful, all of those things. He pulled back to look at her. "How are you feeling? Are you well? Do you need anything?" She laughed at his sudden flood of concern. "I am fine. Just tired and a little queasy in the mornings. The doctor says everything looks good." They told Daniel the next day, and he was torn between excitement at becoming a big brother and worry about what that would mean. "Will you still have time for me after the baby comes?" he asked Grayson. "Always," Grayson said firmly. "A new baby does not change how much I care about you. If anything, I am going to need your help teaching the little one all the important things, like how to feed chickens and muck stalls." Daniel giggled at that, and his worry seemed to ease. Spring came soft and green to New Mexico that year, the winter rains having been generous. The ranch thrived under Grayson's management, the horse operation expanding as word spread about the quality of his training. They were able to buy 10 more cattle with the profits, rebuilding the herd Thomas had started. Teresa's pregnancy progressed smoothly, her belly growing round as summer approached. She gave birth in late August, exactly 1 year after Grayson had first arrived in town, on a day so hot that Mrs. Chen, who served as midwife, kept the windows open despite the flies. It was a difficult labor, longer than when she had delivered Daniel, and there were moments when Teresa thought she could not endure another minute. But Grayson was there, holding her hand, mopping her forehead with cool water, whispering encouragement. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced, the midwife announced, "It is a boy, a son." Grayson took the tiny bundle, tears streaming down his face, and Teresa saw the instant love transform him. This was his first child, the first he would raise from birth, and the significance of that moment was not lost on either of them. "What should we name him?" Grayson asked, bringing the baby to Teresa. She looked down at her new son, then across the room to where Daniel was peeking around the doorway, trying to catch a glimpse of his new brother. She thought about Thomas, about the family they had started together and the family she was building now with Grayson. About endings and beginnings and the strange, beautiful way that life moved forward. "James," she said, "after your father." Grayson's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" "I am sure." "James Vale, it is a good, strong name." They brought Daniel in to meet his brother, and the 8-year-old boy stared down at the baby with a mixture of fascination and concern. "He is so small," Daniel said, "and loud." "You were 2 once," Teresa said with a smile. "Give him a few years. He will be following you around just like you follow Grayson." Daniel seemed to like that idea. He carefully touched the baby's tiny hand, and when the infant's fingers curled around his, Daniel's face lit up with wonder. That first year with James was exhausting in the way that new babies always are, all sleepless nights and endless feedings. But it was also joyful in ways Teresa had forgotten were possible. Grayson was a devoted father, walking the floor with a crying James in the middle of the night, changing diapers without complaint, singing off key lullabies that somehow always seemed to work. Daniel adapted to his role as big brother with enthusiasm, always wanting to help fetch things for the baby or rock the cradle. He was patient when Teresa had to divide her attention, understanding in the way that children who have known loss often are that family is precious. The ranch continued to prosper. By James's first birthday, they had paid off the bank entirely, the deed to the land fully theirs with no encumbrances. Grayson had earned a reputation as one of the best horse trainers in the territory, and people came from as far as Santa Fe to buy his horses or have their own animals trained. They hired 2 additional hands to help with the work, young men from town who lived in a newly built bunkhouse. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, James sleeping in Teresa's arms and Daniel practicing his rope work in the yard, Grayson said, "Do you ever think about Thomas?" It was the first time he had asked directly. Teresa considered the question carefully before answering. "Yes," she said honestly. "I think about him and I miss him, and I am grateful for the years we had together. He gave me Daniel and he built the foundation of this ranch. That is not something I will ever forget or stop being thankful for." She looked at Grayson. "But I do not wish things were different. Does that make sense? I wish he had not died, of course, but I do not wish away what we have built together, what we have become. The past is the past, and this is my life now, our life, and I love it." "I hope he would approve," Grayson said quietly. "Of me, of how I am treating his son, his ranch, his wife." "His widow," Teresa corrected gently. "I am your wife now, and yes, I think he would approve. I think he would be grateful that Daniel and I found someone to love us and look after us." She reached over and squeezed Grayson's hand. "You are a good man. He would see that." Daniel came running up to the porch, breathless with excitement. "Did you see? I got the rope around the post 3 times in a row, I saw," Grayson said, grinning. "You are getting better every day. By this time next year you will be catching actual calves." "Really?" Daniel's eyes were huge. "Really? As long as you keep practicing and listening when I teach you." Daniel ran off again, newly motivated, and Teresa laughed. "You have created a monster." "A very determined monster," Grayson agreed. He looked down at James, who was stirring in Teresa's arms. "I wonder what this one will be like when he gets older. Will he love horses and ranching, or will he want something completely different? I guess we will find out," Teresa said. "But whatever he wants, whatever either of them wants, we will support them. That is what parents do." "That is what good parents do," Grayson corrected. He stood up and lifted James from Teresa's arms, cradling the baby against his chest. "Come on, little man. Let us get you inside before the mosquitoes decide you look tasty." Teresa followed them into the house, her heart full to bursting. This life, this family, this love, it was more than she had dreamed possible during those dark months after Thomas died, when she thought she would drown in grief and responsibility. The years passed in the way that years do, each one bringing its own challenges and triumphs. Daniel grew tall and capable, a skilled horseman and rancher who took pride in the work. James proved to be his brother's opposite in many ways, quieter and more thoughtful, more interested in books and learning than in ranch work. But Grayson encouraged both boys to follow their own paths, never forcing either one into a mold. When Daniel was 15 and James was 7, Teresa gave birth to twin girls. The pregnancy had been unexpected, as she was nearly 35 by then, and had assumed her childbearing years were behind her. But the twins arrived healthy and loud, 2 red-faced bundles of energy that they named Grace and Rose. "We are going to need a bigger house," Grayson said the day he brought Teresa and the babies home from the doctor's house in town. "We are going to need a lot of things," Teresa agreed, looking at their suddenly very crowded bedroom. "But we will manage. We always do." And they did manage, because they did it together. Grayson built additions to the house, creating more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Daniel helped, his carpentry skills improving under Grayson's patient instruction. James entertained his baby sisters with songs and stories, patient with their grabbing hands and piercing cries. The ranch grew along with the family. They expanded the horse operation, breeding their own stock now rather than just training wild-caught animals. The cattle herd numbered over 100 head. They bought another 80 acres from a neighbor looking to sell, increasing their holdings to 240 acres total. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Grayson took Teresa into town for dinner at the small hotel restaurant, leaving the children in Daniel's capable 17-year-old hands. It was the first time they had been alone together, really alone in months. 10 years, Teresa said, lifting her wine glass in a toast. "Who would have thought?" "I did," Grayson said, touching his glass to hers. "From the moment you agreed to give me a chance, I knew I would spend the rest of my life proving you made the right choice." "You proved that in the first week," Teresa said. "Everything after has just been confirmation." They talked long into the evening about the children and the ranch and their dreams for the future. Daniel would likely take over the ranch someday, though he had recently begun courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, so perhaps they would merge operations. James was begging to be sent to school in Santa Fe, his quick mind hungry for education beyond what the small schoolhouse in Pinos Altos could offer. The twins were still young enough that their futures were uncertain, full of possibility. "You ever regret it?" Teresa asked as they walked back to the wagon under a sky full of stars. Stopping in Pino's Altos that day instead of moving on, you could have had an easier life working for one of the big ranches. Grayson stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands coming up to cup her face. I've never regretted it for a single second. You and our children are the best thing that ever happened to me. This life, this family, it is everything I ever wanted but did not know how to dream for. He kissed her then, long and sweet, and Teresa felt the same flutter in her stomach that she had felt the first time he kissed her all those years ago. Some things, she thought, do not fade with time. Some things only grow stronger. Daniel married Emily Carson when he was 19. A small wedding at the ranch with the whole territory invited, or so it seemed from the crowd that showed up. Emily was a practical, hard-working girl who loved ranch life as much as Daniel did, and Teresa knew they would be happy together. A year later, they welcomed a son, making Teresa and Grayson grandparents for the first time. "We are too young to be grandparents," Teresa protested when Daniel placed the baby in her arms. "You are 40 years old," Daniel said with a laugh. "I think that qualifies." The baby, named Thomas after the grandfather he would never meet, had his mother's dark hair and his father's serious expression. Holding him, Teresa felt the circle complete itself in a way. Thomas's line would continue, his name carried forward, even though he had not lived to see it. James did go away to school in Santa Fe when he was 14, his quick mind earning him a scholarship to a prestigious academy. He came home for holidays and summers, always full of stories about what he was learning. The ranch would not be his future. They all knew that, but he remained connected to the family, to the land that had shaped him. The twins grew into beautiful young women, Grace inheriting Teresa's coloring and Rose taking after Grayson. They were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and sharing everything. At 12 years old, they were more interested in horses and adventure than in the domestic arts, much to Mrs. Chen's amusement. "They are wild things," the older woman said one day when Teresa brought the girls into town. "Like young colts." "They are their father's daughters," Teresa agreed fondly. On a warm evening in early summer, when Teresa was 42 and Grayson was 44, they sat on the porch swing that Grayson had built for their 5th anniversary. The ranch sprawled before them, peaceful in the fading light. From inside the house came the sounds of Grace and Rose arguing about something, their voices rising and falling. Daniel and Emily's house, built on the far side of the property, showed a warm glow of lamplight. James was home from school for the summer, probably in his room reading. "Do you remember that first day?" Teresa asked, her head resting on Grayson's shoulder. "When you rode up to the livery stable and Daniel wanted to see your horse?" "I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen," Grayson said, "and the most stubborn." Teresa laughed. "I was terrified, a strange man offering to help when I had been managing on my own for so long. It seemed too good to be true. And now I know it was just good." She tilted her head up to look at him. "You meant what you said that day. That boy needed a father and I needed a partner. You gave us both those things and so much more." Grayson kissed her forehead. "I got the better end of the deal, I think. A ready-made family and a woman worth building a life with." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, the same stars that had watched over them that first night when they captured the wild horses, when Teresa had first begun to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be happy again. The years continued their march, as years always do. Daniel and Emily had 3 more children, expanding the family even further. James graduated from the academy and went on to become a lawyer, eventually settling in Santa Fe but visiting the ranch often. Grace married a young doctor and moved to Albuquerque, while Rose, true to form, married a cavalry officer and traveled with him to various posts across the West. Through it all, Teresa and Grayson remained the center, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They worked the ranch together, raised their children and then helped raise their grandchildren, and loved each other with a steady, enduring love that deepened with each passing year. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Daniel's children, now numbering 5, ran wild through the yard. James came with his wife, a smart woman he had met in law school. Grace and Rose were both home with their families. The house and yard were full of laughter and noise and life. That evening, after most of the guests had left and the family had gone to bed, Teresa and Grayson once again found themselves on the porch, watching the stars. 25 years, Teresa said, still marveling at how quickly the time had passed. We have been married almost twice as long as I was married to Thomas. You still think of him? Grayson asked, as he had that night so many years ago. Sometimes, Teresa said, but mostly I think about us, about the life we built. He was my first love, and I will always be grateful for that. But you are my great love, the one I was meant to spend my life with. Grayson pulled her close, and they sat there in the darkness, two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment, who had built something beautiful from loss and hope and hard work. "What are you thinking about?" Teresa asked. "About a young widow who gave a drifting cowboy a chance when she had no reason to trust him. About a little boy who needed a father and found one. About how one decision, one moment of saying yes instead of no, can change everything." "Do you think you would have moved on if I had said no that day?" Grayson considered this. "Probably. But I think I would have regretted it for the rest of my life. I think I would have always wondered what might have been." "I am glad I said yes," Teresa said softly. "I am glad you stopped in Pino's Altos that day. I am glad you saw a broken fence and a struggling ranch and a widow who needed help. I am glad for all of it. So am I, love. So am I." They remained on the porch long after the candles had burned down inside, long after the last child had fallen asleep, long after the moon had risen high in the sky. Two people, no longer young but not yet old, holding hands and counting their blessings and knowing that what they had was rare and precious. The ranch would continue after them, passing to Daniel and his children and their children after that. The land they had fought so hard to keep would remain in the family, a legacy of love and perseverance. But that was for the future to worry about. Tonight, there was just this moment, this love, this life they had built together one day at a time. As the years stretched into decades, Teresa and Grayson grew old together the way that couples in love do. Their lives so intertwined that it became hard to remember a time when they had not been together. They sat on the porch every evening, watching the sun set over the mountains, holding hands and talking about everything and nothing. Daniel proved to be an excellent rancher, taking over more and more of the operations as Grayson's joints stiffened with age. But Grayson never fully retired, always finding some task that needed doing, some horse that needed training, some fence that needed mending. It was who he was, and Teresa loved him for it. On a cool October evening, when Teresa was 65 and Grayson was 67, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch house, expanded many times over the years, was filled to bursting with family. There was music and dancing and stories, each generation adding their own chapter to the family history. Late in the evening, Daniel stood up to make a toast. He was 50 now, his hair graying at the temples, his face weathered by years of sun and wind. But his eyes were warm as he looked at his mother and stepfather. "I want to thank Grayson," he said, his voice carrying across the crowded room, "for stopping in Pino's Altos 40 years ago, for seeing a boy who needed a father and a woman who needed a partner, for staying when he could have left, for loving us when we desperately needed love." His voice grew thick with emotion. "You could have been my stepfather. Instead, you chose to be my dad in every way that mattered. Thank you for that." There was not a dry eye in the room. Grayson stood up and embraced Daniel, both men holding on tight, and Teresa felt her heart might burst from the fullness of it all. Later, much later, when everyone had finally gone home or to bed, Teresa and Grayson made their slow way to their bedroom. Their movements were stiffer now, their steps slower, but they still reached for each other in the darkness, still found comfort in the warmth of familiar bodies. "I love you," Grayson whispered into the darkness. "I have loved you for 40 years, and I will love you until I draw my last breath." "And I love you," Teresa whispered back. "Thank you for giving me this life. Thank you for being exactly who you are." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, just as they had done for thousands of nights before. The seasons continued to turn, winter giving way to spring, spring to summer, summer to fall. Teresa and Grayson marked the passage of time by the growth of their family, by the changes in the ranch, by the aches in their joints and the silver in their hair. They were happy, deeply and profoundly happy, in the way that people who have built a good life together are. On a morning in late spring, when the world was green and new and full of promise, Grayson did not wake up. Teresa found him in their bed, peaceful and still, gone in his sleep without pain or struggle. He was 72 years old, and they had been married for 45 years. The grief was overwhelming, a tidal wave that threatened to drown her. But underneath it was gratitude, deep and abiding for the life they had shared. 45 years of love and partnership, and building something beautiful together. Not everyone was so lucky. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, the same hill where he had proposed to her all those years ago. The whole territory seemed to turn out for the funeral, testament to the life he had lived and the people he had touched. Daniel gave the eulogy, his voice breaking as he spoke about the man who had been his father in every way that mattered. After the funeral, after the visitors had left and the food had been put away, Teresa climbed the hill to sit by the fresh grave. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, and she thought about all the sunsets she and Grayson had watched together. "Thank you," she said to the grave, to the spirit she believed was listening. "Thank you for 45 years. Thank you for loving me and Daniel and all our children. Thank you for stopping in Pino's Altos that day and seeing what we needed. Thank you for being the partner I needed, the father Daniel needed, the grandfather our grandchildren needed. Thank you for everything." The wind picked up, rustling through the grass, and Teresa chose to believe it was his answer. She lived for 8 more years after Grayson's death, surrounded by family, watching her great-grandchildren grow, taking comfort in the legacy they had built together. The ranch continued to thrive under Daniel's management, now expanded to over 500 acres with 200 head of cattle and a renowned horse breeding operation. On a warm summer evening, a month after her 80th birthday, Teresa passed away quietly in her sleep, in the same bed where she had slept with Grayson for 45 years, where she had given birth to 3 of her children, where she had lived out her life. They buried her on the hill next to Grayson, their graves marked by simple stones that bore their names and the years of their lives. But their real monument was all around, in the ranch that still bore the Hartley name, in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their blood and their values forward into the future. Daniel stood at his mother's grave after the funeral, his own hair now white, his own children grown with children of their own. He thought about the day Grayson had ridden into town, about how one moment, one decision, one person saying yes instead of no had changed everything, had saved them all. "Thank you, Mama," he said softly, "for being brave enough to accept help when you needed it, for giving us Grayson, for building this family." He walked back down the hill to where his own children and grandchildren waited, back to the ranch house where several generations now lived and worked together. The sun was setting, painting the sky in gold, and he thought about how his mother and Grayson had sat on that porch every evening, holding hands and watching this same sky. Love, he thought. That was their legacy. Not just the land or the money or the success, but the love that had started between a struggling widow and a drifting cowboy and had grown to encompass generations. Love that had healed wounds and built dreams and created a family that would endure long after they were gone. It was a good legacy. The best legacy. And so the ranch continued, season after season, year after year, the land enriched by the love of those who had worked it, the family strengthened by the foundation Teresa and Grayson had built. Their story became family legend, told and retold to each new generation, a reminder that sometimes the greatest blessings come from the simplest acts of courage, from saying yes when it would be easier to say no, from opening your heart when it has been broken. The boy who had needed a father grew into a man who became a father, then a grandfather, then a great-grandfather. And through it all, he carried with him the lessons Grayson had taught him about hard work and integrity and love. He passed those lessons to his own children, who passed them to theirs, each generation adding their own wisdom to the accumulated knowledge of those who came before. The ranch prospered and grew, adapting to changing times while holding fast to the values that had founded it. And on summer evenings, when the work was done and the sky turned gold, there was always someone sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, remembering the love story that had started it all. A widow who had been brave enough to trust again. A cowboy who had seen what was needed and offered to provide it. A boy who had needed a father. A partnership that had become a love story for the ages. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the struggles or the hardships or the challenges overcome, but the love that had sustained them through it all. The love that had built a family, a ranch, a legacy that would endure for generations to come. And if you listened carefully on those quiet summer evenings, some claimed you could hear echoes of laughter from the hill where Teresa and Grayson rested side by side, together at last for eternity. Their love story complete, but never really ending, living on in every sunset, every child's laugh, every moment of connection between the generations that followed. It was a good life, it was a good love, and in the end that was everything.